Nintendo just announced during a Nintendo Direct a whole slew of new announcements, including some more information about games like Detective Pikachu and the upcoming Mario Tennis Aces, which I personally have no interest in. We also got announcements for Undertale, South Park The Fractured But Whole, and Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy also finding their way into the Nintendo Switch later this year. But come on. That's not why we're here. No, you didn't click on this video for that. No. We all know why you're here. The latest teaser trailer for the upcoming Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo Switch pretty much confirmed what has been one of Nintendo's least well-kept secrets in years, as well as confirming that the Inklings from Splatoon will be joining the roster in the upcoming game. So, as a fun little activity for us here to do, and because this is YouTube and is how you get views, I asked everyone in our little group who was interested in Super Smash Bros. To give me a little list of dream additions to the upcoming game. I then took each list, calculated the averages and whatnot because I like to pretend I'm smart, and came up with this top 10 list. Before we get into the list itself, we gave ourselves a few rules. And by that I mean I gave everyone a few rules to follow. Here they are. Now, for the actual list itself, each character will be given a brief explanation, including potential attacks and a potential ultimate that I personally came up with on my own, with a little bit of help from those who I collaborated with. Also, before we start, there might be a few spoilers for some of these games, so consider yourself warned, I guess. So, without further delay, here is Valiant Attempt Gaming's top 10 characters we want added to Super Smash Bros. For Switch. Number 10. Undine. With the reveal that we'd be getting Undertale on the Nintendo Switch at some point in the future, and Game Maker being on the system soon enough after that, it would make sense to have a character who represents the independent side of the system. And who better than Undine? Undine is the fish warrior of Undertale and one of the fiercest warriors in the game. Her fighting style could see her using her large energy spears both as melee attacks and as ranged attacks. She could also be a fighter with a counter, referencing the boss fight you have with her in the game, where she has you block incoming attacks from one of 4 directions. As for her Smash Ball ability, which I will be giving a Smash Ball ability to every character because I assume that will be included in this upcoming game, it would only make sense to me to have her go into the Undine the Undying state, and much like Giga Bowser or Gigamac would grow in size and power. It would be a very brief ultimate, but it would be one that would be powerful all the same. Honestly, you could put just about any other Undertale character in here, and Papyrus was pretty close to be added to the list itself, but Undine seems like the perfect fit. She's a fierce warrior, she's a wonderful character in the actual franchise, and I think she would do well to represent Undertale in Super Smash Bros. Number 9. Simon Belmont. Killing vampires and the creatures of the night can be exhausting. So you know how you can unwind? Taking on Nintendo's grand history of fighters in the Smash tournament. Simon Belmont is the main protagonist of the first 2 major Castlevania games, making appearances in several later on, and is one of the early mascots during the NES days. With his variety of weapons at his disposal, he could be similar to Link or Mega Man, who have a variety of attacks thanks to a wide variety of items to attack with. His ultimate could include the big bad vampire himself, Dracula, where Simon lures the vampire lord to him only to dodge an attack meant to kill him, and instead forces those near him to be hit by a massive blow from Dracula himself. Simon Belmont is honestly one of those additions that feels like it should have happened a long time ago. When Konami provided a character for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, some thought it might be Simon, but we were given Snake instead. Snake was a fine addition to the roster, but Snake is not Belmont, and I feel that that should be remedied here. Number 8. Hector. Super Smash Bros. Is already chock full of characters from the Fire Emblem series, each with their own unique way of fighting. That said, pretty much all of them use a sword. With the wide variety of characters that Fire Emblem has provided over the years, it's odd we have only sword fighters thus far. And that's where Hector comes in. With his powerful axe, he could fight similar to Ike, but with less sword moves and more aggressive attacks meant to send opponents flying. His moves would be slow, but much like Undine before him, could deal a massive amount of damage. With his powerful armor, he could be harder to knock off, but his movements would be slowed drastically as a result, potentially leading to minimal recovery abilities in case he falls off the platform. His ultimate could see him equip a legendary axe called Armids, spinning it in the air above him before slamming it down on his opponents, sending them flying from the initial hit and a potential shockwave thereafter. Though some might scoff at the inclusion of yet another Fire Emblem character, I think Hector would be an exception, simply because he doesn't use a sword like literally every other Fire Emblem fighter in Smash Bros. Some might argue Robin, but aside from the spells, Robin still uses a short sword. Having a change-up to the Fire Emblem roster could reinvigorate people to the franchise, and showcase the early history of the franchise, as Hector was introduced to North American audiences in the first Fire Emblem title that was released outside of Japan. So, a fun little history there. Number 7. The Farmer. Harvest Moon is a series that has been horribly misrepresented in the Smash Bros. Games to date. And, that makes perfect sense. In terms of gameplay, Harvest Moon is a much more subdued franchise, more about relaxing than action-based combat or exploring or anything like that. But with the last entry, Nintendo introduced The Villager from Animal Crossing, which is also another laid-back and relaxing game. Which just goes to show, like Marvel before them with Guardians of the Galaxy, they can pretty much have no limits to what they can add at this point. The farmer's attacks could utilize the various tools and crops that they use throughout the game, as well as calling for the aid of some of their barnyard friends. They could summon a cow to ride, much like Wario's motorcycle, or potentially send a chicken flying towards an enemy to cause some damage, much like a cuckoo. Their ultimate would be a little bit of a silly one, but it would see them unleashing a stampede of farm animals across the screen, hitting everyone within a certain range. As a fun little bonus, the dog could straggle behind a bit because that would just be cute. Harvest Moon is a franchise that should get more than just a few trophies or stickers within Smash Bros. It has a rich history with Nintendo, and to see it not be represented up until now is kind of a sad sight to see. Hopefully Marvelous will work with Nintendo to make this one happen, and if not, maybe we'll get Isabelle as a fighter in the next game. Number 6. Impa. Much like Fire Emblem, The Legend of Zelda is another series in Super Smash Bros. That is far from underrepresented. But unlike Fire Emblem, we've essentially had the same 3 characters show up as just that representation. We've had 3 different versions of Link up to this point, a Zelda by herself and a Sheik by herself, and then a Zelda that can transform into Sheik as 3 separate characters, and then Ganondorf. He's just Ganondorf. Adding to that history is something that Nintendo clearly wants to do, since with each new updated Smash entry, they change the outfits of the characters, including, as we saw in the teaser trailer for the new game, changing Link to be more like the Breath of the Wild Link. But what we need is some new fighters, and I personally think Impa is a perfect addition to make to that. I specifically want to use Impa we see in Hyrule Warriors, due in large part to the power she is shown to have thanks to the Dynasty Warrior style of fighting, and because they are coming out with Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. With her giant blade and Naginata, she could have a dual setup. One set where she uses her giant blade and water magic to deal heavy attacks while moving slower, and then can switch mid-fight to the Naginata and Fire, where she moves faster but deals less damage. Think of it like Zelda switching between Zelda and Sheik in Brawl, but the character stays the same while the weapon changes. The Naginata wouldn't be much faster than the Giant Blade, given that they are both still rather large weapons, but they could still potentially find a way to differentiate them with something like range. Since we're going to be using the Hyrule Warriors variant, her ultimate could be similar to her X special attack, where she freezes enemies within a certain range for a moment and unleashes a powerful side swipe with her Giant Blade, sending them flying. Impa is a character that has been in the series of Legend of Zelda since Ocarina of Time, and while she has appeared in most of the Legend of Zelda games since in some form, it's really a shame she hasn't appeared in Smash Bros. Up to this point. And who knows, maybe they'll make Zelda and Sheik one character again since they are no longer bound by the technical limitations of the 3DS, and Impa could take the place of Sheik. Worst case scenario, we have another fighter on our hands. Number 5. Cinna Roar. With the last entry of Super Smash Bros., we were given Greninja as a playable fighter, and he quickly became one of my personal favorites. The Smash games have a history of introducing new Pokemon into the roster, whether it be through actual playable fighters or in terms of the Pokeballs that you can use during combat, and I personally feel Cinna Roar would be a perfect addition from the newest generation. One of the fighting types Smash Bros. Lacks is a grappler, someone who comes in close, slams you down, and won't let go while they wail on you. Some fighters, like Bowser and Ganondorf, have a few select moves that do this, and Cinna Roar could join them. With moves like Thrash, Darkest Lariat, and Fire Fang pulled from the actual Pokemon games and into this, Cinna Roar could deal massive amounts of damage from a close range, probably at the cost of not too many ranged attacks. Darkest Lariat would probably be the closest thing to one where he would spin around, but that would be more of an on-the-ground move than anything else. His ultimate would be an almost direct callback to Pokemon Sun and Moon's Z Crystals, Malicious Moonsault. He could swipe in front of him, hitting an enemy or two, and then a recreation of the Z-Move's animation can play, where he body slams onto his opponent inside of a massive wrestling ring. Barring making Incineroar his own fighter, they could also reintroduce the Pokemon Trainer from Brawl, only this time, make them an Alolan variant. Utilizing Incineroar as the heavy hitter, they could also have Dartrix as more of a ranged attack, and Popplio as sort of the fun little Bulbasaur type character. Who knows? That could happen. We've seen Alolan versions that are weirder. Number 4. King K Rool. Nintendo has a thing about having their heroes invite villains into their fun little side games. Mario always invites Bowser to play sports or go go-karting, and Ganondorf kind of just showed up in Smash Bros. One day. But we have yet to see an appearance from one of Donkey Kong's greatest villains, King K Rool.
It's great to be a king. I seem to have a knack for taking everything I want and giving nothing back.
Making his first appearance in the original Donkey Kong Country, King K. Rool is one of the baddest of the bad. His moveset could show that. With his imposing height, he'd be a much slower but very powerful fighter. Utilizing some of his tricks from the Country series of games, King K. Rool could throw his crown like a boomerang, kick at enemies near him, use a cannon as a ranged weapon, and ram into enemies at high speeds by slamming them with said cannon. His ultimate could see him bringing his ship, the Gangplank Galleon, into the fray, sending a barrage of cannonballs onto the field that cause massive amounts of damage to those unfortunate enough to be hit. While he hasn't had the staying power of some of Nintendo's other villains, King K. Rool is no less a part of the Nintendo family. And with Nintendo porting over Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze from the Wii U to the Switch, it is possible we might get a new Donkey Kong game in the future. Maybe Mr. Rool is the new villain? Just saying. Number 3. Waluigi.
How the fuck have we not had Waluigi as a fighter yet, mother of God?
I'm sorry, I get emotional sometimes. Waluigi has been in the Mario canon since his first appearance in, get this, Mario Tennis for the N64 back in the year 2000. Yeah. Since then, he's appeared in more than 50 Mario titles, pretty much all of which are just spin-off titles like the sports games, go-karting, or the Olympic Games with Sonic. I think it's about time he stepped off the playing field and into the arena. Seeing as how we don't know that much about Waluigi's past outside of his inclusion in sports games, many of his attacks could show his sports side. He could throw baseballs at enemies, use a tennis racket as an attack, hit golf balls at someone, and more. Barring that, he could also have moves similar to Luigi, his self-proclaimed rival, with the traditional Mario uppercut being an obvious choice. His ultimate could honestly be a number of things, referencing the various games he's been in, from Mario Kart, Mario Party, all the sports games, but seeing as he's a counterpart to Wario, maybe making a Super Waluigi would make the most sense here, making him faster, stronger, and lighter on his feet than he already was for a short period of time. Regardless of your personal feelings towards the character, I feel it's about time we had him in this series as more than just an assist trophy. Let him come out of the shadows and into the spotlight with a weird array of attacks, alongside his good friend Wario, and show that there's more to him than just a roster filler for spin-off games. By making him a roster filler in a spin-off games, yeah, I didn't really think that last line, did I? Number 2. Shovel Knight. When many people think about classic Nintendo games, they usually think about the main series titles, like The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros., or Donkey Kong Country. But back in 2014, a small studio by the name of Yacht Club Games released a brand new title that seemingly drew inspiration from all 3 of these franchises and more. That game was Shovel Knight, and it became an instant sensation when it first released on the Nintendo Wii U. Shovel Knight himself is rather quick, utilizing his shovel for combat. With a rather unique moveset at his disposal, Shovel Knight already has just about everything he needs to get into the fight. He can drop onto his enemies with his shovel, swing at them with his shovel, dig enemies into a hole with his shovel. If a shovel can do it, so can Shovel Knight. His ultimate could even see him reunite with his old friend Shield Knight, as the two run across the screen, with Shield Knight leading the charge and bashing into anyone unfortunate enough to not get out of the way, and Shovel Knight using his shovel like a baseball bat and sending them into oblivion. Shovel Knight is easily one of the most popular choices when people bring up adding new characters to the Smash roster, and for good reason. His game plays a lot like an old school Nintendo game, and he was even given the honor of being the first non-Nintendo made amiibo, which I have and love having. If they were to add any new additions to the roster, I have a strong feeling Shovel Knight would be at the top of their list. But there's one fighter who just barely beats him out. A new addition to the Nintendo Pantheon. Or rather, two new additions. Number 1. Springman and Ribbon Girl. When ARMS was first shown off, I thought it was a pretty gimmicky game with not enough content. After they showed off a bit more, I picked it up about the time it launched, and I fell in love. The fighting style for the game is so unique that it begs to be redone in some form, and what better place to put two fighting game characters than in a fighting crossover game? I'll admit, this one is kind of cheating, given that they are two separate characters in their respective game, but the basic fundamentals of the combat apply to both fighters. Using their spring arms, they could launch punches from a great distance away, allowing them to fight opponents just outside of their reach. With their ability to grab hold of enemies and ram into them, they could close the gap between them and an opponent very quickly and still have the ability to get away. And with their stretchy abilities, they would be hard to knock off, allowing them to reach platforms much easier than some other characters. Both fighters have unique abilities in arms, which made it hard to choose between the two of them. Springman, the arguable mascot of the game, has the ability in arms to permanently charge a set of arms when his life bar reaches a certain point, and Ribbon Girl is gifted with additional jumps, letting her stay in the air for far longer. Both of these wouldn't be too hard to implement into Smash Bros. Ribbon Girl wouldn't take anything at all outside of giving her a few more jumps like Kirby or Jigglypuff, and Springman could deal slightly more damage the more damage he has taken, or, barring that, give him the KO meter that Little Mac has. For an ultimate, they could easily just use the rapid fire punches that they get as sort of their ultimate in the game, but I think utilizing Headlock, the final boss of the game, would be the best. When he drops down onto the fighter and gives them an additional 4 arms to punch with, that would make them a true punching fiend and a true threat to be reckoned with. Regardless of which of the two they go with, both would be a wonderful addition to the franchise, and already come ready to fight. While some characters in Nintendo's rich history might be harder to come up with abilities and such for in terms of making them a character in Super Smash Bros., Springman and Ribbon Girl are already fighters, and ready to spring into action. I'm sorry. And that's that. This whole process took quite a while for us to come to a conclusion on, but hopefully you agree with some of our decisions. We also have a few honorable mentions, as you can see here, or in some cases characters who either didn't have enough votes to make it into the final list or were unique enough to be added. I'll admit 1 or 2 of them were added because I personally liked them, and I'm editing this and can do what I want, so nah. I want to also give a big thank you right now to Walter, Jimmy, Jerry, and Emily for helping me put this list together. I can tell you right now that if they hadn't voted on some of the choices for who should be in the next game, this list would have looked very different if it was just my choices. And if you're curious about what each of us chose, feel free to check out our brand new Tumblr page, linked down in the description below, where we have posted each of our individual lists. We may also start doing a couple of other lists in terms of Super Smash Bros. On there, so keep an eye out there. Anyway, we're all super excited for the new Super Smash Bros. Coming to the Switch, and you can bet we'll be playing it on here when it finally comes out later this year. Let us know who your hopefuls are for the next entry in the series in the comments below. And again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video. Take care.